more to learn from our kids than we thought. I've been lucky enough to work with Roz for quite a few years now, and it gives me great pleasure to ask them to read for you this afternoon. Please make Roz feel welcome. Thank you, everyone. So the story, and thank you to Megan as well for the opportunity to be part of such an amazing project. The bit that I'm going to read to you is about teaching a Year 7 class a unit on sci-fi, which was terrifying to me because it's really not a genre that I know that well. And so here we go. A week into the unit on science fiction, we started discussing a short story in which teachers are replaced by robots. Several students raised their hands. The first student to speak said, "I read an article that said in a decade or two, teachers really will be replaced with robots." "I read that they won't be," another student replied. "Well, what about self-checkouts at the supermarket?" the first student countered. They've been taking away jobs from human beings, and it won't be hard to do the same in other areas like teaching. I mean, we all use the internet for learning anyway, and there are now options to do distance education online. They just need to take it up a few notches and throw in AI. I had to remind myself that these students were in their early teens. Their responses to the story led to a fascinating and emotional discussion around fears and uncertainties about the future, including climate change and the changing nature of the workforce. At a certain point, I started to realise my contribution to the discussion wasn't needed. I could reframe the conversation when it shifted off topic, ensure that everyone had the opportunity to speak, and connect the conversation to the text that we were studying. But my students had everything they needed for a nuanced discussion, and eventually debate. I hadn't expected the students to understand the themes so intuitively or grapple with them so thoughtfully. Issues that came up as mere hypothetical considerations in my schooling 2 decades earlier have now become part of regular high school conversations, regardless of how politically active the students are. It was clear that my students were worried about the future. I read that we don't even know yet what the future jobs will be, a quiet student spoke up. A huge percentage of the jobs haven't been invented yet, and they're too high-tech for us to know about. What does that mean for your education, I asked them. Is it relevant to you? Can we prepare you for a world that we can't predict? No and no, the student answered. I mean, we have to do it anyway, it's school. Getting into uni will be more important than ever, but it's probably all irrelevant. We're already allowed to use calculators and maths and the internet when we're doing assessments. We need to know how to read and write, another student added, but otherwise we can figure it out online much quicker. He was interrupted by another student. I mean, why don't we get to study coding, even basic coding? It just seems like a bad idea not to be equipping students with that knowledge when we're definitely going to need it. I should point out this was a SEAL class, which is like an advanced class, just to give you a bit of context that they had these conversations. And their interests are things like programming and like physics at Year 7, so just FYI. After the lesson, I thought about my students' determination to gain the skills and knowledge they believed were needed in order to keep up with the rapidly changing fields of science and technology. Unlike the divide I had encountered between STEM and the humanities at uni, these students didn't see a reason to separate the disciplines. The scientific components, literary techniques and themes, and the philosophical implications of speculative fiction were all connected. Later, when we covered poetry, autobiographical writing and fiction, it was interesting to see the way that certain themes returned again and again. We talked about book censorship and the silencing of certain voices. Many saw politics as intrinsic to their schooling and critiqued subjects that didn't contextualize learning within that framework. Many people are afraid of listening to young people. They find it safer and more comfortable to silence, discipline, ridicule, and correct them, rather than reflect on their ideas and make changes as a result. There is a lot at stake here, much more than testing scores. Holistic approaches to learning and well-being require all adults, not just teachers, to answer difficult questions and prompt discussion around topics that are meaningful to young people, with the least amount of bias and defensiveness that we can manage. At some point, I stopped wondering whether my tertiary training and life experience had equipped me for the role of high school teaching. Whether or not we're all going to become obsolete and replaced with robots, complete with built-in software that automatically marks our students' work, is irrelevant. These days, we have more to learn from our students than we have to offer them. In the middle of the sci-fi unit, we analysed Ray Bradbury's short story, All Summer in a Day, set on the planet Venus in the future, when the sun only comes out once every 7 years. We had discussed what may have caused the situation on that planet, and students referred to environmental catastrophe and nuclear war almost immediately. I had to stop them from going down a Donald Trump rabbit hole, a topic they could talk about for hours. What do you see as the most important message in the story? I asked the class. The There were a few different responses touching on bullying, jealousy, selfishness, and being different. Later in the lesson, I walked around the classroom while the students answered some written questions. I stopped at a student's desk, noticing that he looked pensive. "How are you going?" "I'm okay," he replied. "I was just thinking about how sad the story is and how unfair. You said it was written in the 50s? I nodded. "That's really interesting to me. It's weird how it's still relevant." He glanced out the classroom window. "I guess that's why we continue to read and study dystopian literature." It's not all bad news. There was a general sentiment of "we'll cope whatever the new normal brings" among my students. This brave, head out of the sand approach to the things that keep us awake at night is what is needed to navigate an uncertain future. This requires a new approach to education by educators, whether we look to other countries or find our own. My students made me aware that we need to reconsider the current schooling system, and I'm hopeful that this change will be student-led and student-centred. Perhaps adults are the ones with the most to learn, and the younger generation should be doing the teaching. Thank you.